Fasting is really popular right now, but I'm going to tell you about a method of eating that is simpler than fasting and can be as effective as fasting at reducing weight, improving cholesterol levels, and even improving your gut microbes. And it doesn't take any extra change to your diet or any extra time. But first, you need to understand one simple fact, and that is that up to 50% of people eat for 14 hours or more every single day. So if you're having breakfast before work, let's say around 7 a.m., and then you're snacking and eating all the way until dinner at around 9 p.m., you're in that group. But here is the good news. Studies show that simply moving your dinner time can help you lose fat, improve your blood sugar levels, inflammation, even improve your sleep and more. And this is the strategy that is easier than fasting, just simply changing when you eat. In this video, we're going to dive into meal timing and how that can benefit your circadian rhythms. And this is referred to as time-restricted eating in the academic literature. It's simpler than traditional fasting and doesn't involve calorie counting. And here are the 5 key benefits, potential risks, and how it could work for you. So I'm going to pull up this diagram here that Mitch is going to pull up on screen for us. And this is going to look at what I was just describing before, which over 50% of people currently do. They eat around the clock. And what that's associated with is higher body weight, higher adiposity. So that's the fat around our midriff. It's higher in oxidative stress. So it's associated with high inflammation levels and glucose intolerance, etc. Whereas if you restrict when you eat, regardless of calories, there appears to be some benefits, and we'll dive into that in a second. So what are the benefits of this TRE method, as it's colloquially referred to, or time-restricted eating? Well, meta-analyses of clinical trials show that eating within this shorter time window can potentially improve fat loss. So there are a number of studies that show reduced body weight, reduce fat mass, reduce weight circumference, which is something that we can measure in clinic very easily, and that is correlated or tightly tied to poor metabolic health. The visceral fat as well. So this is the fat that coats your inner organs. It's a relatively late stage if you're over-consuming calories or you're over-consuming sugar in particular, and also inflammation as well. That's measured by, in the lab, tumor necrosis factor alpha, but also in regular blood tests by HSCRP, that's high sensitivity CRP, which is a very easily done blood test. It also preserves fat-free mass during weight loss, which is interesting because there are some studies that show that the traditional fasting methods where we do not eat for an entire day might actually fall down in that area. There is actually a loss of muscle, which means that you're not going to be as metabolically healthy. So that's a really important point to remember. The other potential benefit of time-restricted eating is blood sugar control. So studies have shown, again in these meta-analyses, there is a lower HbA1c. So that is a marker of the preceding 3 months of how well you regulate sugar in your bloodstream. There's also better insulin levels, regardless of calorie restriction, and participants who are overweight, obese, or have type 2 diabetes. So that's better blood sugar regulation with time-restricted eating. There is also potentially a benefit for systolic blood pressure. So that is almost like a silent killer, because we know that high blood pressure is associated with increased shearing force on our vessels that can exacerbate the atherosclerosis process that can lead to heart attacks and strokes. So that's a really important measure, something that we should all be measuring at least on a monthly basis. And then there's also the benefit on cholesterol levels. So people who perform this time-restricted eating, and I'll get into how you can do this yourself, have reported reduced levels of triglyceride, total cholesterol, and something called low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, which is a marker of the carrier protein of cholesterol around your body as well. There's also a few small human studies that found that intermittent fasting, which is this method of time-restricted eating. Intermittent fasting is a bit of a vague term, but this time-restricted eating method in particular is associated with improved richness and diversity of the gut microbiota. We'll go into why that might be as well. And there's also potentially, and this is looking at cross-sectional studies, potentially a benefit on mental well-being as well. People who practice a 10-hour eating window were less likely to show signs of mental health distress, particularly in those aged over 70, but there are a limited number of randomized controlled trials looking at that effect. There's still a lot we need to learn. These studies are really hard to compare due to differences in the design, the populations, the mix of people within that population. The outcome measures all seem different. So it's a real murky field, but there is enough signal within this for this to have a potential benefit. And this is something that I'm quite excited about because it is so simple to do yourself. You could do this tomorrow. You could do it today if you wanted to. So I think for the lack of rigor in the evidence space, the potential cost is actually quite low. So that's why I'm excited about this method of fasting that is far simpler than traditional methods of fasting. So how does it work? So TRE, time-restricted eating, is technically a form of intermittent fasting. So this is where you eat within a specific window each day. And this window ranges from 8 to 12 hours each day. So you don't change how many calories you consume, you just change when you consume said calories. Most of this fasting window is overnight, so it's actually quite easy to do. So if you're doing something like a 12-hour feeding window, which is probably the easiest, practically that is starting eating at 8 a.m., finishing eating at 8 p.m. That is it. And there are a number of ways in which researchers think it works. The most obvious way is probably that if I am rigid about when I decide to start eating and stop eating, I'm less likely to overconsume calories, energy in the form of cookies and snacks and all the rest of the stuff that I do out of boredom in the evening, which not only is adding to my energy burden, but it's also adding calories at the wrong time of day when my body is actually trying to go into rest and digest mode, rest and not eat mode. That's essentially what I want to be doing later on in the evening, close to bedtime. So the obvious answer is TRE makes you eat less calories. Hence, you have all these different benefits because you're not eating as much. That's going to improve your weight. That's going to improve your cholesterol. That's going to improve your blood pressure. That's going to improve your insulin control. Very, very simple. Very, very simple explanation. I can definitely get on board with that. There are some more nuanced reasons as to why this might be working. One of them is circadian rhythm alignment. I've alluded to this already. So eating in phase with your light and dark cycles. So that's in the morning when it's light and avoiding eating in the dark when your cells are all looking to shut down. This can potentially strengthen the body's natural circadian rhythm. So this is the rough 24-hour cycle that all your cells operate on, from your pancreas to your stomach to your brain cells. And this potentially improves metabolic efficiency. It helps regulate your blood sugar levels as digestive and metabolic processes are optimized during active periods during the day where it's light and less so when it's dark. So that's eating less calories. You're more aligned to your natural 24-hour rhythms. The third thing is fuel switching. So fasting deprives the body of glucose. This is the preferred fuel of your body. And when you're in an extended fast, you don't have readily available glucose to use from your bloodstream. So what do? You tap into your stores. These are stores of sugar that we store as glycogen. And that's the actual official word, but these are stores of sugar that you've packed away for a rainy day. This is sort of like the Snickers bar that you've got at the bottom of your bag when you're out camping, just in case you run out of food. Turns out you'll go through that within about 12 hours. That's on average. Some people are 15, some people are a bit longer, so they might need a little bit longer of a time-restricted feeding window to tap into this metabolic fuel switch. But after that, after the stored glucose is expended, then your body will shift into an alternative energy source like fatty acids. So it essentially increases your fat burning mode. And this is where you get some extra benefits, extra energy, extra focus, concentration. These are the anecdotes that people talk about when they do extended fasting periods, which is why it's so popular. This is something you can still potentially achieve with a time-restricted eating window without having to go a couple of days of fasting. Certain people are more likely to be able to do that, depending on their genetics, depending on their pre-existing state as well. So this fuel switching may also lead to some of these benefits that we see too. The fourth thing is rest and repair. So fasting actually activates a mechanism called autophagy. So this is something that gets bandied around quite a bit because, it's exciting to think that this process whereby your cells start utilizing damaged or old cells and ripping apart their machinery and then putting them onto new cells, brand spanking new cells. So you're getting rid of the old and in with the new. It's a really exciting process. There is no particular way of us being able to measure the speed or the increased level of this process called autophagy. But the theory is that fasting helps the body clear out damaged cells by upregulating this autophagy process. So recycling those old cells and then putting them back together in shiny new healthy components. That is a theory, and that is something potentially that time-restricted eating can also upregulate, as well as your traditional fasting methods as well. So you can understand why this is so interesting for people who are overweight, who might have high cholesterol. Fasting as a tool, I think, has definitely got legs. But time-restricted eating is like this middle ground whereby you don't need to go through the extreme of fasting to get some of the benefits. It's sort of like someone who doesn't really exercise suddenly deciding to do a marathon when actually they could just do a 10 or a 5K. Time-restricted eating is the 5 or 10K of the running exercise activity. You don't always need to go to the marathon to get some of these benefits. You can get most of the benefits that people actually want by just doing the time-restricted eating method, which is why I'm a fan of it as well. What are the risks? Well, the risks with fasting per se is that you're limiting the amount of time that you can actually give your body nourishing food. So you're not going to be able to give your body enough protein, enough of the fiber that supports your gut microbes, enough of the nutrients that you require on a daily basis. That's with fasting. With time-restricted eating, depending on the window of eating that you actually have, so if it's really small, like you're only giving yourself 6 hours of eating time, that again might be quite hard to get the sufficient number of calories that you require from proteins, fats, fiber, carbohydrates. It can be quite difficult to cram everything in, particularly if that 6 hours is during a work day or you don't have access to kitchen appliances or food that's actually healthy for that matter. If you have an extended time-restricted eating a window whereby it's actually around 10 hours, that might be less of a concern. But you do need to be cognizant of your diet quality because you are effectively reducing the number of hours that you can actually give your body food. So it's important to eat enough nutrient-dense food, including those sources of protein, fiber, and essential nutrients to stay healthy. And it stands to reason that poor diet quality, such as low nutrient, high fat foods, junk food, this could also limit the effectiveness of time-restricted eating. So if you might fall into that category, just think about perhaps diet quality before you think about fasting as a tool whatsoever. And if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, I highly recommend you don't really do any of these fasting methods because you don't want to limit the time by which you can actually take in nutrition, because nutrition is super important. But also if you have type 2 diabetes or you take medications for that, you may want to speak to your doctor prior to trying these fasting methods, even time-restricted eating, because it can lead to effects and changes in your glucose levels that you might need to titrate with medications or lifestyle changes as well. We also don't have a full grasp on the long-term effects of time-restricted eating either. So I can't point to long studies of 2, 3, 4 years of people who are doing time-restricted eating rigorously for that amount of time and what the ultimate effects are on muscle protein synthesis or bone mineral density. It's quite hard to actually ascertain what the effects might be. Pragmatically, just changing your eating window, as long as you're consuming enough energy in the form of good quality proteins, fats, and fiber and carbohydrates, I don't foresee any issues, but it is something to flag as a potential caveat. Just a quick one. If you want to learn the 5 ingredients that I think are fantastic for inflammation that you should be getting into your diet every week, then download this PDF right now. It's in the link down there, and I'll send you my 5 ingredients for inflammation. So here are 3 points to remember for effective time-restricted eating if this is something that you're interested in. The first thing is early dinners. So that's the meal time that I would actually play around with. And I would highly recommend that you eat earlier in the day. And it's generally more effective because the body's metabolism is optimized for food intake during the day, during daylight hours. And as such, some concerns have been raised around eating in later windows, promoting insulin resistance. So if you're eating a late dinner, or at worse, in the middle of the night, so shift workers, just beware here and just pay attention to what I'm saying. Late night eating has been linked to high risks of type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and obesity. Essentially, the calories that you consume out of hours, literally out of hours, will count more. So if you are going to be playing around with time-restricted eating, you want to ensure that you're having an earlier dinner rather than a later breakfast. And if you are going to be pushing your breakfast back, you want to bring your dinner forward a bit as well. So that's eating early in the day. We also know that if you're going to be eating later, so a later dinner, that's going to affect your sleep. And we know that sleep disruption is associated with what I've just mentioned, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. So that could be the mechanism by which this is affecting your risk of disease. So just something to bear in mind. If you are going to be messing around with this, I would say bring your dinner earlier. The second thing is consistency. So you want to stick to a consistent eating schedule every single day. The regularity helps your body adapt. It helps your microbes adapt to when they expect food, and it could potentially maximize those benefits of time-restricted eating. It also would have an impact on your sleep as well. And we know that one of the pillars of sleep is not only sleep duration, sleep quality, the environment in which you sleep in, and making sure you're getting non-REM and REM, but also regularity of sleep. Regularity of sleep is going to help you and your body get into that mechanism, that regularity of sleep dosing. And so if you're consistent with when you eat, that will have a knock-on effect on your sleep schedule as well. The third thing, always to remember whenever messing with time-restricted eating, is your diet quality is going to be the most important thing. So I wouldn't do time-restricted eating at the expense of diet quality. I would do it the other way around. I would always say your diet quality is the most important thing. So if you do need to eat in a 14-hour window, that's more important, ensuring you're getting enough fruits and vegetables and fiber and plant-based protein, largely plant-based protein, compared to sacrificing that and doing time-restricted eating. So always think of your diet quality as the most important pillar before you even start messing around with other fasting techniques like time-restricted eating. People always struggle with early dinners. And whenever I suggest early dinners, I always get some funny looks about, late night snacking and how do they stop their late night snacking. I get it. I've been there myself. What I do with myself is set a regular dinner time with my wife. So I choose a consistent dinner time around 6:30 p.m. I know that sounds early. If that sounds too early, maybe 7 p.m. You want to stick to that. That routine helps your body get used to that earlier eating schedule as well. It helps train your microbes to actually expect food during that time, and it makes it a lot easier to avoid the late night snacking as well. To try and hit that earlier window, the second thing I always recommend is plan and prep ahead. So I always try and plan and prep my meals in advance rather than getting into the kitchen and thinking, what on earth am I going to eat? I've got a fridge, it was like got some food, I don't know how to put those together. Think about planning ahead. I'm of the sort of confidence in the kitchen that I can look at most things and think I can make a meal out of that. I'm the outlier, not the norm. Most people will go into a kitchen and not really have a clue as to what they want to eat. If you're in that category, you want to make sure you're planning and prepping as well. Chop your veggies, marinate your proteins, cook meals on weekends so that dinner is ready and you can stick to your earlier eating time. Third thing is understand your cravings. So if you're craving foods late at night, figure out why. Are you actually hungry? Is it out of boredom? Maybe your dinner wasn't as filling. So maybe try adding extra fiber or extra protein. That is a strategy to ensure you're not going to bed hungry. No one wants to feel hunger in the middle of the night because you haven't allowed yourself to have late night snacks. Instead, think about what things I can introduce earlier during my actual dinner that will stave off those cravings throughout the night, where I can actually extend that time-restricted non-eating window. And if it is more about that comfort or habit, try distracting yourself with some simple relaxing activities, sipping herbal tea, enjoying a calming hobby. These are all things that could help, stave off the boredom and how you're eating out of boredom rather than true hunger. I actually do a simple strategy after I've eaten dinner to prevent myself from like snacking out of boredom, brushing my teeth. So after dinner, I'll brush my teeth pretty soon to signal to my brain and to me literally that eating time is over. I don't want to eat anything and have to clean my teeth again. So brushing your teeth is actually quite a nice little hack to ensure that you're going to stick to that consistent early eating window as well. So 24 hours of time-restricted eating, what does that actually look like? So an ideal circadian day for an average adult could look like this. So I'm going to wake up. I've obviously had 8 hours of quality sleep. I'd be very lucky if I get that. I got about 6 hours last night. But my morning routine would be hydrating, going outside to expose myself to bright light within the first half of the waking hour to set my internal clock, lower the melatonin as it inhibits the melatonin, any melatonin that I've got left, and also increases the wakefulness because going outside is just refreshing and it's a great way to get yourself out of sleepy mode. My breakfast won't be until a couple of hours after waking because I like to exercise pretty much after an hour of waking. So I'll wake up, I'll hydrate. Sometimes I will take electrolytes, particularly if I'm doing a zone 2 workout, which is a long aerobic exercise. And I won't have any food until after that. So I train fasted. Again, I've described it before. I like to switch myself into fat burning mode. And if I've had a 12-hour fast overnight, essentially, that exercise is going to kick me into fat burning because I'm going to expend the glycogen stores and move into the fatty acid stores as a preferred fuel, which is away from the actual preferred fuel, which is glucose. So how am I going to break my fast? Protein and fiber-rich foods, tofu scramble, eggs, beans, yogurt, plenty of vegetables and fruits. That is a great way to break your fast. You want something that's protein rich, which is satiating, and fiber-rich as well to feed those microbes that are going to power you throughout the whole day as well. If, and it's a big if I need a mid-morning snack, I'd go for a very light snack like veggies, hummus, apple, nuts and seeds. I rarely need a snack mid-morning anymore because I'm very cognizant of how much protein I require, particularly after exercising as well. My lunch is pretty much my leftovers from the night before. So it could be a bean curry, it could be tempeh, it could be leftover chicken salad, anything that, again, hits those protein, fiber, and anti-inflammatory requirements. So herbs and spices and dark green leafy vegetables. That's my lunch. I really don't mid-afternoon snack. If I am going to mid-afternoon snack, it will be something like a hibiscus tea. It could be a latte that's decaf because I have all my caffeine in the morning. That's another very good strategy to ensure that you're going to get quality sleep. And otherwise, it will be dark chocolate as well. So dark chocolate is one of my favorite things to eat. 85% plus, that's my mid-afternoon snack, if I even require a mid-afternoon snack. And then my dinner, as I explained before, is usually around 6:30 to 7 p.m. After that, that's when my fast starts. So I don't eat anything until the following day. So my window is anything between 13 to 14 hours on any general day. The evening time, after I've eaten dinner, brush my teeth, I'm not having anything after that. That is a very simple strategy for putting into practice time-restricted eating. If you do that for 30 days, see how you feel. Intuitively, you will know if you feel more energy, what your sleep has been like, what your training is like if you're exercising, and you will know the benefits. And I think this is far easier than a 5-2 method or other forms of intermittent fasting where you have to completely remove food for 24 hours plus. Some people feel the benefits of that. I personally can't go for 24 hours plus without getting gastritis. That's my personal reason why I'm a big fan of time-restricted eating instead. A couple of questions that we'll get on the screen here. Can I drink coffee during my fasting window? This is actually quite a contentious subject. Some people say it breaks your fast. Some people say it doesn't break your fast. My opinion is that it doesn't break your fast. So the reason why is because you're not consuming any proteins, you're not consuming any glucose, no carbohydrates, nothing that's going to cause a glucose and insulin spike. However, the caveat is if you are sensitive to caffeine or you get jittery after having your coffee, that could reasonably lead to a cortisol spike that could release glucose into your system. and that can push you out of a fast. My personal opinion is that that's not appropriate for me. I actually enjoy my coffee first thing in the morning. It helps my performance in the gym. So I'm always going to be using coffee, but I never put milk in it. I don't use any creamers, and I certainly don't put any sugar in my coffee either. That could potentially put me out of a fast. So I think as long as you're drinking black coffee or black tea or black green tea with no milk or anything like that, not that you'd want to put milk and green tea or Darjeeling tea for that matter, I think that's perfectly fine. What if you feel hungry in the morning? If you feel hungry in the morning, I would say make sure you're hydrating properly. And it's fine to break your fast in the morning. If you want to break your fast in the morning earlier, then bring your dinner earlier as well and see if you can fill that window. You might also want to think about what your evening meal looks like as well. Did you have enough fiber? Did you have enough protein? Is it the fact that you had a carbohydrate-rich meal in the evening, like a pasta or something? It dipped your glucose level overnight, and that's why you're getting these feelings of hunger, because your hormones are all over and you wake up feeling that you're not satiated whatsoever. So I think that's an important consideration. What does your dinner look like? If you're really hungry in the mornings, eat a breakfast. That's totally fine. Just bring your dinner earlier in the day. Third question, can I exercise while fasting? Absolutely. You can absolutely exercise while fasting. If you're new to exercising whilst fasting, I would go slow and see how you feel. Some people require a handful of nuts, walnuts, something like that, to power them through an exercise session. If you're in that category, don't restrict yourself from food just because you want to get into this fasting window. If you're feeling lightheaded, dizzy, anything like that, just go for something and eat something. That's totally fine. But I think it's completely safe to exercise whilst fasting, as long as you're not exerting yourself for extended periods of time, like doing a 2 or 3 hour ride. You might need to fuel yourself with food. If you want to do like a long bike ride, for example, and you're new to fasting and exercising whilst fasting, you might want to try shorter windows of exercise in that fasted state before you try and do something long, because you never know what your glucose level is going to be like. And I think it's always safer to extend that window gradually rather than go straight into a long ride and then have to stop for whatever reason because your glucose level is too low. But generally, a 45-minute workout is completely fine to do fasted. And finally, tips for shift workers. This is something that we've discussed on the podcast before with a colleague who's a sleep medicine researcher. My tips for shift workers, and I used to be one myself, where I'd have to wake up at 7 p.m., get to work by 8:30 p.m., work the entire night, 12 hours, and then I wouldn't get home until like 10 a.m. When do you eat? So I would always try and have my breakfast, which is traditional dinner time, before I went to work. I would have drinks that are clear throughout the evening, and then I would have a big dinner / breakfast around 6 or 7 a.m. So I don't eat during that time when my body isn't expecting any food. I recognize that not everyone is like that. So you really have to figure out what your own process and how your body reacts to that kind of fasting window, because it can be quite difficult, particularly if you're running around a hospital or whatever your activity is during the evening. You might need some food to fuel yourself through that as well. So just be cognizant of what you eat, counting a lot more. I would really stay clear of ultra-processed foods. I would definitely not have any fast food if I can avoid it. Things like pizzas, takeaways, burgers, that kind of stuff. So if you can avoid that in the middle of the night, please do, because those calories will count a lot more than regular healthy food that's protein-rich and high in fiber. So if you can eat the start of your shift and the end of the shift, that's perfection. If you have to eat something, make sure it's not ultra-processed food if it's in the middle of the night. If you're interested in losing weight or losing belly fat specifically, then check out this video right here where I do a deep dive into everything to do with weight loss, the science of how it works, and how you can action something today that can maintain your weight in a healthy way that doesn't lead to crashes and regaining of the weight. We've done a deep dive into the evidence behind all of these different diets and which one could be appropriate for you. Check it out right there.